Hello everyone, this is Mr. Abdul Wahab again. We're working on the SAT practice test number 2. So far, we've gone through the first text in this practice test and we've gone through the second one as well. Now we'll be tackling the third one. And so far, we have found out that it is not actually impossible to get all correct answers on the SAT. So we've read all of this, we did all of these questions 1 to 10, and then we read the second one. And we went through questions 11 to 21. Now, the following text has questions 22 to 32 based on it. And so far we've read a piece of fiction, and which is considered literature in the SAT, and a piece of non-fiction, which was considered social studies. Now, this is a bit more scientific. And again, we saw that scientific texts or texts of non-fiction do not necessarily have to be especially challenging or tough to comprehend or understand. And as we said, you don't need to have any background information on any of the topics mentioned within the SAT text. You don't need to know about economics or programming or neuroscience. You don't need to know any of these stuff. You only need the skills that would enable you to fully read, comprehend, and analyze the text presented in the SAT. So this is exactly what we're doing again. And of course, we're gonna begin with the same piece of advice that I gave you at the beginning of the previous text, and that is read the intro, this caption before the text itself. Read it. It gives you an idea regarding what's going to be discussed in the passages. And so, passage 1 is adapted from Nicholas Carr, author Nicholas Carr, The Web Shatters Focus, Rewires Brains. So by reading this caption, I could understand that the first passage is going to tell us about how the web affects the mind negatively. It rewires the brain. It changes how the brain functions or works. The web shatters focus. It harms focus. And passage 2 is from Steven Pinker, Mind Over Mass Media. So we can't conclude a lot of things from this title, but at least we know that, again, it's going to tell us about the mind and how it interacts or how it gets affected by the mass media. Also, by reading the caption and by looking at the subheading right here, you now know that you have two passages to deal with. Passage 1, and if you go down below, you'll find passage 2. You should expect such texts on the exam, where you have two passages, you have to read both of them, and usually you're asked to compare or contrast the ideas presented in them. You need to find how the authors would agree or disagree regarding the issues or the topics or the concepts discussed within both passages. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to read both of them, and we're going to try to understand them as best as we can, and then we're going to go through the questions 22 to 32, and we'll do them one by one. So let's begin. Passage 1. The mental consequences of our online info crunching are not universally bad. So the author of passage 1, Nicholas Carr, begins by stating that the mental consequences of our online info crunching, which is basically being online all the time, are not universally bad, are not all bad. There's some good stuff to it. There are some benefits. Certain cognitive skills. Cognitive refers to things that have to do with the mind. Cognition. Thinking, using the mind to perceive things. Are strengthened. They are made, some cognitive skills are made stronger by our use of computers and the net. These tend to involve more primitive mental functions, such as hand-eye coordination, reflex response, and the processing of visual cues. So some of the benefits that we get by interacting with online material or by interacting with screen surfaces like mobile phones and laptops and tablets and so on, are improved hand-eye coordination, reflex response, and the processing of visual cues, any kind of visual input. One much-cited study of video gaming revealed that just after 10 days of playing action games on computers, a group of young people had significantly boosted the speed with which they could shift their visual focus between various images and tasks. So this study concluded that after 10 days of playing action games or video games on computers, a group of young people had significantly improved the speed with which they could shift their visual focus, with which they could retrain or change their focus or the point of their focus from one image to another. It's likely that web browsing also strengthens brain functions. So not only is it video games that have an effect on the mind, but web browsing as well. It strengthens brain functions related to fast-paced problem solving. So our problem-solving skills are also improved by web browsing, particularly when it requires spotting patterns in a welter of data, in a huge, you could say, reservoir of data. A British study of the way women search for medical information online indicated that an experienced internet user can, at least in some cases, assess the trustworthiness and probable value of a web page in a matter of seconds. So people who browse have an improved ability to assess whether the web page they are reading is reliable or not. The more we practice surfing and scanning, the more adept, the more skilled our brain becomes at those tasks, the better it gets at those. But it would be a serious mistake to look narrowly at such benefits and conclude that the web is making us smarter. So there is no, what Nicholas Carr is trying to tell us here is that there is no actual connection between using the web and becoming smarter. It's not the case. In a Science article published in early 2009, here Science is italicized, and as we said, when a word is italicized this way, it's referring to a mode or a method of publication or to a publication itself. This is probably a magazine called Science. Prominent developmental psychologist Patricia Greenfield reviewed more than 40 studies of the effects of various types of media on intelligence and learning ability. Okay, so she studied the effects. She studied more than 40 studies that discussed the effects of media on the intelligence and learning ability. She concluded that every medium improves some cognitive skills at the expense of others. So what she's trying to say is that although we could get better at certain stuff, we're actually getting worse at others. Our growing use of the net and other screen-based technologies, she wrote, has led to the widespread sophisticated development of visual spatial skills, but those gains go hand in hand with a weakening of our capacity for the kind of deep processing that underpins mindful knowledge acquisition. Lots of huge chunky words. So basically, she wrote, the psychologist Patricia Greenfield concluded that yes, people have experienced widespread and sophisticated development of visual spatial skills. Those are skills that have to do with assessing images in space, basically. However, although this developed, there was a weakening of our capacity, our ability for deep processing, that is, deep thinking, the ability to think deeply about a certain issue, and mindful knowledge acquisition. Mindful knowledge acquisition is when you acquire information and you comprehend and understand it deeply, mindfully. Inductive analysis, we also got worse at inductive analysis. That is when we try to analyze things and deduce or conclude or induce information by analyzing it. Critical thinking as well got worse, which is when you think critically of something, you try to assess it. You try to think whether this thing is beneficial or not. For example, is it harmful or not? You try to form your own opinion by critiquing the thing you're thinking about. Imagination, even our imaginations got worse, and we're getting worse at reflection. We know that the human brain is highly plastic. Here, the word plastic is, of course, not being used to refer to the material plastic. Of course, the brain is not made up of plastic. So let's see what they mean by highly plastic. Neurons and synapses, those are, of course, organs inside the brain or inside the nervous system, change. Neurons and synapses change as circumstances change. When we adapt to a new cultural phenomenon, including the use of a new medium, we end up with a different brain, says Michael Merzenich, a pioneer of the field of neuroplasticity. So basically what they're trying to tell us here is that when we adapt, when we get used to a new cultural phenomenon, like the use of a new medium, like for example using tablets for the first time, or smartphones for the first time, or smartwatches, we end up with a different kind of a brain. This is what this person, Michael Merzenich, had concluded. We end up with a brain that functions and works differently from how it used to work, because it got used, or it adapted to a new medium or cultural phenomenon. That means our online habits continue to reverberate, to take effect in the workings of our brain cells, even when we're not at a computer. So even when we're not working with a computer, these effects, or the way our minds changed, this continues with us even when we're not interacting with that surface. We're exercising the neural circuits devoted to skimming and multitasking, which is what people generally do when they're online, while ignoring those used for reading and thinking deeply. So basically we're no longer actually reading or thinking deeply, according to Nicholas Carr. We're getting better at skimming and multitasking, but we're getting worse at reading and thinking deeply and analyzing and so on. So this was the passage from line 1 to 50, written by Nicholas Carr, and those are his opinions. Those are the results of his research. This is what he thinks. This is the opinions that he backs up. If you go back through it, he has some positive things to say about using computers and the net, that there are some benefits to this, and then there are some detriments to this, disadvantages that we might suffer from. So you should expect in passage 2 to find points or ideas or concepts that actually contrast with the ideas presented in the first passage. That means the author or the writer of passage 2 is probably going to disagree with the author or the writer of passage 1 on certain points, and we need to be able to pinpoint those points. So let's begin. Critics of new media sometimes use science itself to press their case. So it seems that Steven Pinker, the author or the writer of this excerpt in passage 2, he seems to disagree right away from the beginning with what Nicholas Carr had to say. He's saying that the critics, they use science itself to press their case, citing research, which is again what Nicholas Carr did, that shows how experience can change the brain. Again, this is exactly what the author did in the first passage. But cognitive neuroscientists roll their eyes at such talk. They hate this talk. They don't agree with it. Yes, every time we learn a fact or skill, the wiring of the brain changes. So this is a point of agreement. Every time we learn something new or we learn a new skill, the wiring of the brain changes, the way the brain functions changes. It's not as if the information is stored in the pancreas. So of course, what he's trying to tell us is, of course, the brain's gonna change. I mean, in the end, it's the brain we're interacting with when we're trying to learn something new. So, but the existence of neural plasticity, again, we're encountering this word again, plasticity, which is not plastic, again, not the material. This is the ability for something to probably change or to get modified somehow. The existence of neural plasticity, the plasticity of the nervous system, of the nerves, does not mean the brain is a blob of clay pounded into shape by existence. So Steven Pinker does not think that the brain is a blob of clay that you could just shape by experience. Experience does not revamp, it does not change the basic information processing capacities of the brain. So experience does not change the basic way in which the brain functions. Speed reading programs have long claimed to do just that, speed reading programs have claimed that they could change the capacities of the brain. But the verdict was given by Woody Allen after he led Leo Tolstoy's famously long War and Peace in one sitting. War and Peace, of course, is an extremely long novel written by the Russian author Leo Tolstoy. And this is what Woody Allen had to say. He said it was about Russia. So this is everything that Woody Allen basically got from reading War and Peace after he went through a speed reading program. So he tried to speed read through War and Peace, and he probably didn't comprehend a lot of it. Genuine multitasking too has been exposed as a myth. So no, we don't get better at actual multitasking by being exposed to new media or to media. Not just by laboratory studies, but by the familiar sight of an SUV, a sport utility vehicle, undulating between lanes as the driver cuts deals on his cell phone. So the idea is that genuine multitasking has not actually improved due to media consumption. Moreover, the effects of experience are highly specific. So the effects of experience are highly specific to the experiences themselves. If you what does this mean? Let's see. If you train people to do one thing, recognize shapes, solve math puzzles, find hidden words, they get better at doing that thing, but almost nothing else. So what Steven Pinker is trying to tell us that if we train the brain to do something specific in a better way, yes, it's going to get better at doing this specific thing in a better way, but it's not going to affect how we do other things. It's not going to improve the way we, for example, if we're learning to solve math problems, this is not going to help our deduction skills, for example, or it's not going to help us get a better imagination or whatever. We're just getting better at solving math puzzles or math problems. Music doesn't make you better at math. Conjugating Latin doesn't make you more logical, and brain training games don't make you smarter. You just get better at brain training games. Accomplished people don't bulk up their brains with intellectual calisthenics. You don't need to know the meaning of the word calisthenics to understand what's being said here. You could get this from the context. So accomplished people who are accomplished, who have actually done really well in their fields, they don't bulk up their brains, don't fill their brains with intellectual jargon, useless information. They immerse themselves in their fields. That's what accomplished people do. They put themselves completely into their fields. Novelists read lots of novels, and scientists read lots of science. That's how they get better at their fields. That's how they become accomplished. The effects of consuming electronic media are likely to be far more limited. These effects are far more limited than the panic implies. So basically, people are exaggerating. The effects are not as huge or as radical as we might think. Media critics write as if the brain takes on the qualities of whatever it consumes, the informational equivalent of you are what you eat. As with ancient peoples who believed that eating fierce animals made them fierce, they assumed that watching quick cuts in rock videos turns your mental life into quick cuts, or that reading bullet points and online postings turns your thoughts into bullet points and online postings. So basically, again, here's Steven Pinker trying to tell us, no, our brain and our thinking and our intellect is not getting improved generally by doing specific things like these. We're not getting smarter because of it. If we're reading bullet points and online postings, we're just getting better at recognizing them or seeing them or reading them, but nothing else really. So this is the second passage. We can see that they mostly disagree on the effects of media or the negative effects of media on human beings. There are points, mainly points of disagreement, a tiny bit of agreement in both of them, but let's take a look at the questions immediately. So the author of passage 1 indicates which of the following about the use of screen-based technologies. So what does here, this question is connected to passage 1 only. So the author of passage 1 indicates which of the following about the use of screen-based technologies, that it should be thoroughly studied. Well, he didn't say this. He actually resorted to studies himself. So it makes the brain increasingly rigid. This wasn't mentioned in passage 1. Neither in passage 2, of course. It has some positive effects. Well, yes, he did say this. He did mention a few positive effects of the use of the media. He began by saying that the mental consequences of our online info crunching are not universally bad, that they are strengthened, certain skills are strengthened. So he does say that there are some positive effects to the use of screen-based technologies. It should be widely encouraged. He didn't encourage it at all. He just said that there are some good things and bad things about it. So it's C. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? You have 4 options. Again, personally, I based my answer on the previous question on specific lines. So if you're confused about this, you could go through each and every one of them. But for me, I mean, I can already see the answer because I know where I got my answer from. I went to these lines, that certain cognitive skills are strengthened by our use of computers and the net. And this backs up our conclusion in the first question, which is it has some positive effects. Since I know what I based my answers on, I don't need to go through the rest. But if you feel like you need to or that you want to, sure. The author of passage 1 indicates, again, we're only talking about the first passage here, that becoming adept means really good, at using the internet can make people complacent about their health. Not really. He didn't talk about health, and he didn't talk about people becoming complacent or happy about their health, neither sad. Undermine the ability to think deeply. He did mention this. He did mention this in the first passage. He mentioned, again, he said that certain skills are getting developed at the expense of others, right here. And then he said that the visual spatial skills are getting developed, but they go hand in hand with a weakening of our capacity for the kind of deep processing and mindful knowledge acquisition, among others. So he did think that it undermines the ability to think deeply. But I'm going to read the rest. Increase people's social contacts. He didn't say it's going to make you more social or that you're going to get more friends. Improve people's self-confidence. He didn't talk about this either. So our answer is B. As used in line 40, plastic most nearly means, and again, this word stuck with us because it wasn't being used to refer to plastic, the material. We know that the human brain is highly plastic. And then we read further, neurons and synapses change as circumstances change. So we're looking for a word that indicates that something could change. It's not creative, it's not the ability to create, it's not artificial. Artificial is a meaning or a synonym of plastic, but that's not how the word plastic was used here. Malleable. Malleable actually refers to things which can be changed or shaped. So for example, metals are malleable. That means you could shape them, change them. So malleable sounds good. How about sculptural? They get sculptural. They sculpt stuff. Not exactly. So C is our best answer. Now, the author of passage 2, now we're working with passage 2, refers to the novel War and Peace primarily to suggest that Woody Allen did not like Tolstoy's writing style. Not really. Again, he said that when he was asked why he understood from the book, he said it's about Russia. So he didn't get a lot of it. He didn't say that Tolstoy's writing style was bad. Could not comprehend the novel by speed reading. Well, if the only thing you got from such a lengthy novel like War and Peace is that it's about Russia, that means you didn't get a lot. So that sounds good. He had become quite skilled at multitasking. That's not what was indicated by the text. Regretted having read such a long novel. He didn't show regret at all, so he just could not comprehend the novel by speed reading it. According to the author of passage 2, now we're working again with passage 2 only. What do novelists and scientists have in common? What do they have in common? They take risks when they pursue knowledge. Well, they might, but this was not mentioned in the text. They are eager to improve their minds. Well, again, they might be, but the author of passage 2 didn't indicate this. They are curious about other subjects. Not exactly. They become absorbed in their own fields. Well, he said that novelists read a lot of novels and scientists read a lot of science, so they're becoming absorbed, or their attention is getting completely directed or taken by their own field. Now, the analogy in the final sentence of passage 2 has primarily which effect? Which effect does it primarily serve? The analogy in the final sentence of passage 2. Here's passage 2. Here's the final sentence. As with ancient peoples who believed that eating fierce animals made them fierce, they assume, these critics of the media, that watching quick cuts and rock videos turns your mental life into quick cuts, or that reading bullet points and online postings turns your thoughts into bullet points and online postings. So this is an analogy, of course. Now, what's an analogy? An analogy is when you compare two things to each other, but it's basically to point out that they're actually not similar, or at least that's how the analogy works in this case. So it uses ornate language to illustrate a difficult concept. Well, first of all, it doesn't use ornate language. Ornate means decorative or flashy language. It doesn't. And it's not trying to illustrate a difficult concept. It's trying to expand on a concept or explain it, but not illustrate it. And again, it's not using ornate language. It employs humor to soften a severe opinion of human behavior. Well, it's not employing humor per se, and it's not trying to soften, or if you could say, it's not trying to alleviate or mollify a severe opinion of human behavior. So B is not exactly our best answer as well. It alludes to the past to evoke a nostalgic response, a response where we miss the past or we feel sad about the past. Not exactly again. It criticizes the view of a particular group. Well, yes, Steven Pinker is criticizing a view held by a particular group who actually think that we are what we eat in the mental sense, that what we consume mentally can have an effect on us mentally as well. Now, the main purpose of each passage is we need to find this common main purpose between those passages, okay? So again, let's go through our options. Compare brain function in those who play games on the internet and those who browse on it. Well, that's not the main purpose, of course. And this didn't even happen. There wasn't a comparison between people who play games and those who browse on it. Passage 1 discussed some of the effects of those who played video games and some of the effects that video games had on those who play them, and the effects of those who browse, the effects of browsing on them. B. Report on the problem-solving skills of individuals with varying levels of internet experience. Again, neither passage concerned itself solely or only with the effects or how the problem-solving skills of individuals varied or changed according to how proficient they are with internet use. Take a position on increasing financial support for studies related to technology and intelligence. Neither passage discussed finance. So make an argument about the effects of electronic media use on the brain. Well, yes, each one of those passages made an argument about the effects of electronic media and its use on the brain. D is our best answer. 30. Which choice best describes the relationship between the two passages? So which choice shows us the common grounds between both, not common grounds actually. It's asking us which choice best describes their relationship, how the two passages are connected to each other. How are they connected? So let's take a look. A. Passage 2 relates first-hand experience that contrasts with the clinical approach in passage 1. Well, passage 2, first of all, did not have first-hand experience. First-hand experience means something that the author experienced himself, and this did not exist in passage 2, the one with that was written by Steven Pinker. Passage 2 criticizes the conclusions drawn from the research discussed in passage 1. Yes, Steven Pinker did criticize those conclusions. Passage 2 takes a high-level view of a result that passage 1 examines in depth. That basically passage 2 is looking at something superficially, while this same thing was examined in depth in passage 1. Well, again, this is not actually the idea at all. Passage 2, and it's not the idea because it didn't happen. This is not the content of the passages. It's not. Passage 2 discussed the same idea that passage 1 discussed, and almost in the same depth. It's just that the author of passage 2 had different or opposing opinions to what the author in passage 1 implied, and so they both used science or the scientific method to refute one another. Passage 2 predicts the negative reactions that the findings discussed in passage 1 might produce. Passage 2 did not make any predictions, or it specifically did not predict the negative reactions that the findings discussed in in passage 1 might produce. Mainly, what the author of passage 2 did is that he criticized the conclusions drawn from the research discussed in passage 1. Again, if I may remind you, he said that yes, of course, our brains are going to change, but they don't change in the way that you think it's going to change. Steven Pinker said that when we train our brains to do one thing specifically, it's going to get better and rewired to do that specific thing in a better way, but it's not going to make us better in any other thing. That was the critique presented. On which of the following points would the authors of both passages most likely agree? How would the authors of both texts agree? Computer-savvy children tend to demonstrate better hand-eye coordination than do their parents. This was mentioned in passage 1, not alluded to or talked about in passage 2, so this wouldn't be a point of agreement between both passages. Those who criticize consumers of electronic media tend to overreact in their criticism. Now again, this was a point alluded to in passage 1, but it wasn't mentioned in this was alluded to or talked about in passage 2, but it wasn't mentioned in passage 1. The author of passage 1 did not say that people are overreacting. He's actually saying that there are some good points and bad points about the consumption of media. Steven Pinker said that these media critics are taking these conclusions, or they're taking the science or the studies behind these ideas way too far. They are overreacting, but then again, passage 1 did not deal with this point, so this is not a point of agreement. improved visual spatial skills do not generalize to improved skills in other areas. This was a point clearly made in passage 2. Okay? This was a point clearly made in passage 2 that certain skills do not generalize into improved skills in other areas. And if we go back to passage 1 and we go back to this, the author in passage 1, Nicholas Carr, he said that widespread and sophisticated development of visual spatial skills, this is happening to people who are using screen-based technologies, but those gains go hand in hand with a weakening of our capacity for the kind of deep processing. So he's saying that there is development of visual spatial skills, but only that, nothing else. So that is actually a point of agreement for both. So far, this is the best answer. Internet users are unlikely to prefer reading on-screen text to reading actual books. This was not talked about in either passage, so our best answer is C. Which choice provides the best evidence that the author of passage 2 would agree to some extent with the claim attributed to Michael Merzenich in the lines 41 to 43 in passage 1? Which choice? So here, basically, they gave us lines from passage 2, and they're telling us which of these lines in passage 2 agrees with what Michael Merzenich said in lines 41 to 43 in passage 1. Let's go back to check what Michael Merzenich exactly said. So, 41, when we adapt to a new cultural phenomenon, including the use of a new medium, we end up with a different brain. So this is the part that discusses how the brain actually gets affected by the things it's doing. So let's see which lines are being referred to here. Now, in this circumstance, we do need to go through these lines and check which one actually talks about the brain getting affected by everything it receives from the outside. 51 to 53. 51 to 53. Critics of new media sometimes use science itself to press their case, citing research that shows experience can change the brain. Well, these lines, they tell us about what critics think, okay? Not about what the author himself says. So, A is not actually our answer, okay? We are looking for the best evidence that the author of passage 2, lines that he said and where the things he said would agree to some extent with the claim attributed to Michael Merzenich in lines 41 to 43. In lines 51 to 53, Steven Pinker is actually criticizing the critics themselves. Lines 54 to 56. Yes, every time we learn a fact or skill, the wiring of the brain changes. Now here, Steven Pinker is talking, and he believes that yes, of course, every time we learn a fact or skill, the wiring of the brain changes. So those are the words of Steven Pinker. He is saying that yes, the wiring or the way the brain functions changes when we learn a fact or a new skill. So far, B is actually our best answer. Lines 57 to 59. 57 to 59. But the existence of neural plasticity does not mean that the brain is a blob of clay pounded into shape by experience. So here, these words actually contrast with the claim made by Michael Merzenich. So C is not our answer. Lines 83 to 84. 83 to 84. Media critics write as if the brain takes on the qualities of whatever it consumes. The informational equivalent of you are what you eat. So here again, Steven Pinker is criticizing what the media critics say or what the media critics think. And this doesn't actually agree completely with Michael Merzenich said. So our best answer for 32 is B. And again, B contains the words or the opinions stated by Steven Pinker himself. So those were the questions. Those are all of the questions, 22 to 32. So let's, as usual, check if we did a good job. So let's check our answers. Again, you can get these answer keys with explanation from the College Board website. We did questions 22 to 32. Let's go down. And here's 22. The answer to 22 is C. We got it correct. 23 is A. So this is correct. 23 is A. Then 24 and 25, B and C. B and C. 26 and 27, B and D. B and D it is. So far so good. That means when we're getting good answers, that means that the logic we're using is actually working. So 28 and 29 are D and D. So D over here, D over here. 30 and 31, B and C. B right here, C right here, and finally 32 is B. So we got this one correct as well. So this was my analysis and my take on the third text in the practice test, the SAT practice test that you could find on the College Board website. I hope that I was able to actually benefit you and help you understand and comprehend this text and answer the questions presented in it. I hope I was clear enough on all of these questions. And again, if you like what I'm doing, if you like the way we're working, please like, subscribe, and make your thoughts known in the comments section. Please share with people who are going through their SAT studying at the moment. Maybe they would benefit from all of this. And if you have any criticism of my approach or my methods or anything, please let me know. I would love to hear your opinions, and stay tuned for some more videos in the SAT. Next time we'll be working on the fourth passage, and we're gonna deconstruct this one as well and go through all of it successfully. So thank you very much for your time, and again, I hope this was beneficial to all of you. Thank you and goodbye.